In ancient Rome, prostitution was not just a tolerated practice. It was woven into the fabric of society, embraced as both a social outlet and a taxable profession. The Roman state did not merely turn a blind eye to the trade, it regulated and profited from it, ensuring that it became an integral part of the urban landscape. Prostitution existed across a spectrum, from high-class courtesans to the lowest rungs of society. Registered prostitutes, or meretrices, were taxed by the state and operated under legal protections, though their social standing was irreversibly compromised. Unregistered prostitutes, known as prostibule, worked in a more precarious environment, often on the streets or in squalid brothels. Brothels, or lupanaria, dotted the streets of Rome, particularly in the bustling commercial districts. The term lupanar comes from the Latin word lupa, meaning she-wolf. These establishments ranged in quality, from grander venues serving wealthier clients to small, grimy rooms for the lower classes. One of the best preserved examples of a Roman brothel is the Lupanar of Pompeii. This two-story building featured a series of cramped stone rooms with small beds and very, very explicit images adorning the walls. These images may have served both as advertisement for services and as entertainment for the visitors. Prostitutes were easily identifiable by their clothing and demeanor. Respectable Roman women wore the stola, a long, modest garment symbolizing their virtuous status. In contrast, prostitutes often donned the toga, a garment otherwise associated with men or disgraced women, marking them as distinct and marginalized. This visual distinction allowed clients to easily recognize them while reinforcing their exclusion from mainstream society. But were there markers, specific markers, that could identify a prostitute? In ancient Rome, hair color was more than just a personal trait, it carried significant cultural symbolism. Blonde hair, rare among native Italians in ancient times, was often associated with foreign origin. For this reason, while it was not a rule of any kind, blonde hair became a striking feature among Roman prostitutes, whether natural or artificial. Many prostitutes, after all, were slaves captured from regions like Gaul or Germany, where blonde hair was common. These women were often highly valued for their exotic looks, and their fair hair became a marker of their status as outsiders. For Roman citizens, this added an air of allure and decadence. However, not all blonde prostitutes were naturally so. Roman women, including those in the sex trade, frequently dyed their hair blonde or wore wigs made from imported German hair to mimic this desirable look. Blonde wigs were a popular accessory for prostitutes, emphasizing their appeal and helping them stand out in the crowd. The association between blonde hair and prostitution was so strong that it occasionally became a stereotype in Roman literature. Writers like Juvenal mockingly described prostitutes as flaxen-haired, reinforcing the image of blonde hair as a marker of promiscuity. This perception of blondes as sensual or exotic endured beyond ancient Rome, influencing beauty standards in later Western societies, showing how ancient Rome influences us in ways far more difficult to discern than the ones we usually hear about. The legal framework around prostitution was both pragmatic and deeply discriminatory. While the trade itself was legal, prostitutes were excluded from many civic rights and privileges. For instance, they were not permitted to marry citizens, and their testimonies were often inadmissible in court. Nevertheless, the state regulation of prostitution provided a steady income through taxes. The infamous aes e menetricio was a levy specifically on earnings from the trade, further embedding prostitution within the Roman economic system. For many women and men, prostitution was not a choice, but a necessity. A significant number of prostitutes were enslaved individuals or free women with limited means to support themselves. The profession often began at a young age, with some slaves sold directly into brothels. Public attitudes toward prostitution were complex. On the one hand, the profession was openly acknowledged and even frequented by all levels of Roman society. Men of high status, including senators and emperors, were known to visit brothels or maintain relationships with courtesans. On the other hand, prostitutes were socially stigmatized, viewed as both necessary and morally corrupt. Yet there were exceptions. High-class courtesans, or delicate, enjoyed a degree of influence and wealth. These women catered to the elite, offering companionship, intellectual stimulation, and sexual services. Unlike lower-class prostitutes, delicate could wield significant social power, often becoming the confidants of their wealthy patrons. Beyond the brothels, prostitutes worked in various locations in Rome: bathhouses, taverns, private homes, and even out in the street. Their lives were dangerous, and enslaved prostitutes were particularly vulnerable. In order for taxation to be extracted, prostitutes were required to register with local authorities. The registration, a measure meant to regulate the trade, often included disclosing their names and the nature of their services. This system further stigmatized them, and their status as sex worker became a matter of public record. However, this system also offered some legal protections, particularly for registered meretrices, who could sometimes seek recourse in case of assault or unpaid services. On a religious level, the attitude towards prostitution was nuanced. While Roman religion did not condemn prostitution outright, certain practices associated with it were considered sacred, depending on context, of course. During the early Republic, some temples employed so-called sacred prostitutes as a part of fertility rites, though this practice faded over time in Rome. Still, the concept of sexuality as a divine force lingered, and Venus, the goddess of love and beauty, was often invoked in relation to sex and sexuality. The imagery of prostitutes in Roman literature and art reflected their complex social role. Writers like Ovid and Petronius described brothels and the lives of the meretrices with a mix of fascination, humor, and disdain. Imagery of prostitutes can be found from crude graffiti in brothels to more refined portrayals in frescoes and mosaics, underscoring their dual role as both objects of desire and figures of derision. Even the urban landscape of Rome bore traces of its prolific sex trade. Streets near the Suburra districts, infamous for its overcrowded and sordid conditions, were home to countless brothels. Public bathhouses also doubled as venues for prostitutions, while graffiti scrawled on walls throughout the city advertising prices and even reviews for specific prostitutes. Despite their lowly status, prostitutes could sometimes achieve a modest success or upward mobility. Some managed to buy their freedom, accumulate wealth, or transition to other professions. There are even accounts of prostitutes becoming influential figures in their communities, using their earnings to support families or found personal ventures. However, these stories were the exception rather than the rule, and most lived lives marked by hardship and social exclusion. In summary, prostitution in ancient Rome was a multifaceted institution. It was a source of revenue for the state, a symbol of indulgence for its citizens, and a lifeline for those who had no other means of survival. Hope you enjoyed these little escapades in one of the dark sides of Rome, and I hope to see you soon. Leave a like, a comment, and maybe subscribe if you want more. Have a good one.